let's pick up our chain of thought here by going first to that map we were just looking at. So on this map, you were able to, a map of the continents, you were able to see the frequency of haplogroup A in various populations across Eurasia in the Western Hemisphere. And remember, the red, orange, and yellow indicate a high frequency, and the greens and blues indicate a low frequency. And you can see that FADS1 haplogroup A is at a high frequency in the indigenous populations in the Western Hemisphere, in Greenland, and also in some populations in the Arctic region of northwestern Russia, near the Kara Sea. Now, a couple of other studies have been published on this geographically patterned genetic variation of FADS1. Fumagalli et al. In 2015, they argued that this is evidence of strong selection in response to a diet rich in omega-3 PUFAs in the indigenous people of Greenland. Amarin et al., published in February of 2017, concluded that all Native Americans share a signature of selection in their FADS1 because of a single and strong instance of local adaptation that took place in a common ancestral population before they moved into the Western Hemisphere. That last one, does that ring a bell at all? I'm hoping that brings to mind the Beringian standstill hypothesis, where you had a population living on the Beringian landmass that was exposed by the lower sea levels during the last glacial maximum. And they were in genetic isolation for about 5 to 10,000 years, living in a place that lived a lot like this. And some things to think about when you live in a place like that is, one, it's kind of cold, but perhaps most extreme about it is the ultraviolet radiation. This is a high noon in Fairbanks, Alaska. This is the winter solstice. High noon during the winter solstice. Let me see if this video will play for you. And I've never gotten to go this far north. I can't even begin to imagine how amazing that must be. That's noon. Can you imagine? What a thing. What a thing. Now, so, we need the sun. You learned a bit about ultraviolet radiation and the importance of that to our health when you were hearing about and learning about variation in skin color and how important it is to have exposure from the sun so that you have exposure to ultraviolet radiation in order to make vitamin D, because that radiation is what starts your skin, but the radiation exposure to your skin is what starts that process of your body biosynthesizing vitamin D. You saw this map in that HHMI video with Nina Jablonski, and so hopefully this all rings a bell, where you're looking at the UV exposure. And in the equatorial regions, we see those darker blues and purple colors indicating high levels of ultraviolet radiation hitting the surface of the Earth. And as you move away from the equator into the higher latitudes, you have lower and lower levels of ultraviolet radiation exposure. In the areas that are yellow and orange and green, you have that sort of light stippling over them. This indicates that there was selection. There needed to be selection for lighter pigmentation in order for enough ultraviolet radiation accumulated over the course of the year to help the body produce enough vitamin D to stay healthy. Now go into that higher latitudinal region where it's the grays and the black and the white and the much heavier stippling. Once you hit those regions of the Earth's surface, even if you stood outside naked all year round, and if you had essentially no pigmentation, you still would not get enough UV exposure to be able to make enough vitamin D to stay healthy. So as people moved into those regions of the world, they needed some kind of innovation, some kind of dietary innovation to make up for the lack of vitamin D that they were able to make on their own from UV exposure in lower latitudes. So there had to be cultural innovation in order for people to be able to survive and live in the Arctic. And that's exactly what people did. They were able to hunt reindeer. Reindeer eat lichen, which is very rich in vitamin D. And they also innovated how to successfully fish for salmon and other marine animals that are very rich in vitamin D as well. And of course, salmon, rich in vitamin D, but also rich in fatty acids. Now, indigenous Arctic populations have FADS alleles that convert short-chain PUFAs to long-chain PUFAs more slowly compared to people living elsewhere. So this means that they produce lower levels of long-chain PUFAs, relatively. So if you were getting most of your fatty acids from meat, you are actually consuming a lot of long-chain PUFAs. And since a meat-rich diet in the United States today is linked to a higher risk of cardiovascular disease, is this evidence of selection for a slower short-chain to long-chain conversion rate in these Arctic populations? Is that evidence of selection on genetic variation that protects against heart disease in that population? So what is the selection for this slower rate of conversion of short-chain to long-chain PUFAs? Was it protection for cardiovascular health? As you think about that question, I want to remind you of the tyranny of the present. Is our perspective on phenotypic effects biased by the world that we live in today, the culture that we live in today? Now, the people who lead our country are primarily old white guys, and as such, there is a lot of attention paid to their health, and a lot of biomedical resources aimed at figuring out their ailments. But when you were thinking about evolutionary history and how selection works, the health of old guys like this isn't where the evolution is happening. All of these guys, they've already had their children. Their evolutionary fitness is basically already determined. Selection is most strong on phenotypic variation that affects the survival of babies and the little kids. So, as evolutionary biologists, let's consider whether or not genetic variation in FADS influences phenotypic variation that is more closely relevant to the survival of children. In the Nordic countries, there have been a few studies investigating the influence of genetics on breast milk. In a study looking at 309 women in the Netherlands, researchers measured the amount of DHA in their breast milk. Now, DHA is a long-chain omega-3 fatty acid. The graph shown here compares the amount of fatty fish that women were eating to the proportion of DHA in their breast milk. Now on the x-axis, you see the amount of fish the women were eating each week, from 0 to 5. 2 was the recommended intake for them. And on the y-axis, the percentage of DHA in the breast milk is indicated. So women with the B, C, and D haplotypes of FADS1 are plotted in blue and purplish pink. And you can see the regression lines indicating that as fish consumption increased, so too did the percentage of DHA in their milk. The more fish consumed, the more long-chain omega-3 fatty acids in their breast milk. But look at the green triangles and the green regression line. These data show no such relationship. These are the women with the haplotype A. As fish intake increases, there was no increase in DHA in the breast milk of those women. So could it be that the evidence of selection for the FADS1 haplotype A was related to the composition of breast milk? Nutrient transfer from mom to baby in a region of the world where dramatically lower levels of ultraviolet radiation exposure make this a pretty extreme environment to live in? We will think more about that a little later in this module. But before I let you go, to think a little more about cardiovascular health in the next video, I want to highlight a point that is starting to emerge as we work through these various phenotypes. From the selection for lactase persistence in cultures where access to milk is a thing, that extends past young childhood, to the vast differences in ultraviolet radiation exposure our huge genetic distribution has subjected us to. We see that human culture is amazingly innovative and variable, and this can dramatically alter the selective environment for our genetic variation. So keep this in mind as we move forward through this semester.